Automobil verbindet. Automobil verbunden ist absolut verständlich und auch zu erwarten ist, dass
Es werden damit alle Watch how the luxury Trabant was made and compare that to today's Tesla. The 70s was the era of the Trabant, and as you can see, also the mullet hairstyles. Duroplast was a flexible material developed in 1953. All it took was a hammer and a bit of skill. No gloves, helmets, goggles, or special clothing were needed back then. Worker kicks the grill to make the hood fit. The advantage was that owners could easily repair their car. Well, those were different times than today, and it worked. A factory worker could bend Duroplast very easily. Trabants had no fuel gauge inside the vehicle and no fuel cap on the outside, so fuel had to be poured into a tank under the bonnet. Now, for comparison, take a look at the output quality control at the Audi factory. It's not that different. The material was durable, and the average lifespan of a Trabant was 28 years. The Trabant's build quality was poor. The German Democratic Republic regularly encountered shortages of steel and had little to no iron reserves of their own. As a result, state-owned automobile manufacturer Sachsenring Automobilwerke Zwickau instead used Duroplast to produce the body shell of the Trabant. Production lasted from 1955 until just after German reunification in 1991. A light yet strong material, Duroplast is made of recycled material, cotton waste and phenol resins. Because it is formed in a press, it is more easily applied to volume car production than fiberglass. "12,000 people worked in the Sachsenring Trabant factory. A lot of them were foreign workers from Vietnam, Cuba and Mozambique. Up to 580 Trabant were made every day in 2 shifts. The average paycheck of a worker was 1,200 Eastern marks. The 1957 Trabant had no tachometer, no turn signal, no seat belts, no trunk liner, and used an oil-gas mixture. As you can see right now, the quality control of each Trabant was very individual and depended on the mood of the worker. The gap between demand and supply grew, and by 1988, the wait for a new Trabant was 15 years. New owners could unofficially sell their new Trabant for 3 times what they'd paid for it. When re-registering the car with the police, the seller would have to put a sales price lower than the retail price, and the seller and buyer would come to a private agreement for the rest of the money. A 7-year-old Trabant could sell for the same price as a new one. This is the water resistance test for the Trabant and Tesla. This film was made shortly before the production of the Trabant ended. The first Trabant was mass-produced from 1958. Prototypes for a possible successor existed since the 1960s, made out of plastic and steel with 2- and 4-stroke engines. But political leaders had other plans. None of these were mass-produced. They all ended in the company museum. Only the model 601 was left in production. It was made for 3 decades with minimal modifications, ignoring all new developments. Trabants feature a plastic body around a one-piece steel frame known as unibody. Trabant is a Latin word and means companion or fellow, and this is how it was made. Presses for the steel parts for the frame of the Trabant. Workers connect the separate presses to a pressing street. The formed bottom supports the frame. The oval band came in 1963, shortening the production time of each vehicle by 2 hours. Trabant promises all the comfort of a middle seat in coach on a budget airline. It has as much cargo space as a sports car. Trabants need more than 20 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour from a complete stop. And once you get pedaled to the metal in one of these cult cars, you will find that it tops out at a maximum speed of 62 miles per hour. Again, you can compare the handling of the car body at the Tesla car factory in 2024 and at the Trabant car factory in 1970. Duraplast is difficult to dispose of responsibly, a similar problem encountered with fiberglass. As discarded Trabants began to fill junkyards after 1991, creative solutions were devised for recycling them. One was developed by a Berlin biotechnology company, which experimented with bacteria to consume the body in 20 days. Urban legends, depicted in the movie Black Cat, White Cat, and described in a song by the Serbian band Atheist Rap, described recycling Duraplast by feeding the cars to pigs, sheep, and other farm animals. In the late 1990s, Sachsenrings developed a disposal solution in which the body shells were shredded and used as an aggregate in cement blocks for pavement construction. Duraplast is a composite thermosetting resin plastic. The side parts and frames for the front and back windows are clamped. The raw frame was finalized with 4,620 welding points. Western frames have approximately 1,500. The raw frame is done. The forklift drivers of Zwickau are doing precision work. Cotton from the Soviet Union of the lowest quality was used, good enough to be used as filling and a solution to the material bottleneck of East Germany. The second crucial component for the plastic frame was phenolic resin, serving as the binding material. This resin was extracted during the distillation of local brown coal tar. These workspaces were unique, not found in any other automobile factory worldwide. The prepared and shredded cotton was pressed into a fleece and combined with phenolic resin, the dosage of which determined the plastic's properties, flexibility, and durability. Fine plastic dust permeated the air as up to 12 layers of cotton contributed to the plastic skin's durability. The compression and automatic cutting processes enhanced efficiency in production. Templates were crafted for various body parts, such as the back fender. Interestingly, any waste generated was returned to production, illustrating an infinite recycling process. Forming in hot presses initiated the process, reminiscent of a steel press, with a pressing bed and stamp involved. This process was integral to creating components like a Trabant roof. Moving 40 kilometers east to to Chemnitz, near the former Auto Union Racing Department, Industrial Association for Vehicle Construction Conglomerate's headquarters produced the Trabants engine. The unique manufacturing process involved creating crankshafts with expert hits, determining tolerances using a hammer. The band for engine assembly had a capacity of 615 units daily. Pistons, cylinder heads, and other engine components underwent rigorous testing, including a subjective sound test, a specialized job exclusive to this factory. Returning to Zwickau, the cotton and phenolic resin underwent a melting and hardening process, creating the innovative Duroplast. This marked the Sachsenring's significant contribution to plastic development, making the Trabant the first mass-produced vehicle with a plastic body. Choreographed work at the bandsaw and meticulous grinding ensured the panel's quality, each weighing 32 kilograms. The ground layer of the frame was burned in, and the assembly process involved both screws and glue. The paint application featured 5 color options, with a primer applied to enhance durability. Robots sprayed the exterior, while human workers handled the interior, showing a stark contrast in protection measures. The finishing process involved transporting the body to Plant 2 for the final assembly. With a limited band capacity, only 150,000 Trabants were produced annually. The assembly involved a traditional car wedding where the body, engine and frame were combined. After wheel mounting and a series of checks, the Trabant underwent its virgin ride over the test bench. The vehicle wasn't complete until seats were added, each driver having a folding seat. A simple yet effective test gauged the plastic body's leak-proof nature, with each Trabant leaving the factory every 5 minutes. The production history ended on April 1991, with a total of 3,098,000 Trabants manufactured. This marked the closure of VB Industrial Association for Vehicle Construction and East Germany's automobile production, though Zwickau continued its legacy with Volkswagen taking over in nearby Mosel. As you can see, many workers from Africa and Asia worked in German car factories. The Trabant proved to be a rugged little car. It survived over 16,000 kilometers on rough Scandinavian roads in endurance tests. But the Trabant wasn't without its problems. The crankshaft didn't last long, and in fact the problem got worse in 1961, which led the Ministry for State Security to investigate, believing the engines were being sabotaged. In the end, it was attributed to human error, a design change that made things worse. But it showed the rapidly deteriorating relationship between East and West Germany that sabotage was even considered. Socialist East Germany was trying to prove it could do anything capitalist West Germany could do. But under pressure from the Soviet Union, they'd refused much-needed aid from the American Marshall Plan, and with a smaller economy, they were always behind the West. By 1961, almost 100,000 cars had been produced, and both of the old Auto Union factories in Zwickau had been turned over to produce the Trabant. The gearbox got synchromesh, something much needed to relieve stress on the engine parts from dodgy gear changes. The engine got a little larger that allowed the car to get over 100 kilometers per hour. There was a new dashboard with a slot for a radio, and updated seats that improved rear legroom. On the outside, the car was almost identical, although there were some new colors. The new model, called the Trabant 600, was a refinement of the original Trabant, smoothing off some of the rough edges and making a car that was easier to live with. Production grew, and by 1965 almost 70,000 were being made every year. The Trabant continued to be exported, selling to Eastern Bloc countries like Hungary, but it was also fairly popular in the West, selling well in the Netherlands. Development dragged on throughout the 1970s and was finally cut by the East German government in 1979 after deciding it would cost too much to bring to production. Production of the Trabant steadily increased, but it wasn't close to satisfying demand. In real terms, it was getting cheaper to purchase, and many East Germans had money in the bank to buy one, but the East German economy just couldn't produce enough. Waiting lists grew and grew as production slowly increased, but nowhere near enough. The almost linear growth made it seem as if the East German leaders wanted production to be just a little higher every year to show the economy was doing well, even though it was faltering. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Trabants were used as escape vehicles for a population that had been locked behind the Soviet Iron Curtain for decades. Trabants were ridiculed, a symbol of a socialist planned economy gone wrong. It seemed like a piece of ancient history compared to cars from the West. Yet when the Trabant launched, it used upcycled, innovative new materials to bring freedom of movement to a country ravaged by war and lacking basic raw materials. It had a modern front-wheel drive design with rack and pinion steering. As you can see and hear, the Trabant was and still is a fast, agile and good-sounding car. Once loaded onto the trains, the Trabants are taken to their final destination to meet their customers.